And Mr. Chairman, my daughter's going to be taking a piano lesson in the background here, so I may be quiet from time to time, and I apologize in advance.
Hey, y'all have a musical interlude, Jeff.
Yeah.
Just foster that, Jeff. It's a great thing.
Yeah, she just started on guitar too, and she's sounding pretty good.
Good.
She's got a banjo player for a mom and an accordion player for a dad. I don't know what that I don't know if that bodes well or not, but that's what she's got.
Sounds like a bluegrass band.
Yeah.
I wish I could tell you it was a good one, but it probably is one. Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. This is me making sure. We're having some streaming issues, but I think we're going to get them worked out here in just a second.
All right. Well, I lost video. Is that part of the program, or did I touch something?
I see everyone else, Commissioner, so
Okay.
I'm
Let
thinking
me
that
step
one.
in for a second and get
We see you.
helper. It probably is me.
Well, we see you fine. Okay, there's.
I had everything perfect, except I couldn't figure out where the mute was.
Yeah, my son is off too.
Bill, I think we are technically good to go here right now.
And I think we're at a quorum, aren't we? Or are we still needing one more person?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I count 10. I believe you have a quorum.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and call it to order at 5:03 p.m. Central Time. And Elaine, if you would go ahead and call the roll for us.
Okay, here we go.
You're
Bill
muted.
No, not one. Oh, sorry, I thought I unmuted and then it didn't do that. Okay. Bill Cox,
Here.
Andrea Marsh,
Here.
Judge Dean Rucker,
Here.
Judge Laura Livingston,
Here.
Judge Curtis Parrish,
I'm here.
David Slayton, Jeff Burkhart,
Here.
Catherine McNeil.
Appreciate it.
You're muted. I can't hear him.
I'm unmuted.
Chuck Statler,
Here.
He's here.
Bill McKay,
Present.
Rick Wood, Abner Burnett,
I don't see him.
and Dan Hurley.
I saw Dan. We have a quorum.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, everybody, for being back in a short period of time. I'm hoping tonight we'll have a little more expeditious board meeting than our last one. I think we've got some of the issues a little more gelled down than we had last time. And I know it seems a little bit out of order, but in preparing the agenda, it seemed like to give us the advice we need moving forward, it probably made more sense to make decisions on counsel for the RPDO corporate before we go into some of the other issues we need to address and be able to get the advice of counsel in dealing with those.
It was delayed.
And Bill, I saw Matt Wade, and I do see him on my Brady Bunch screen. So Matt Wade is in the conference right now.
And we have the proposal from Matt Wade's firm in the meeting book that picks up on, I believe it's on page 9, but actually before we get to that, I don't think we've addressed the minutes. Has everyone had the opportunity to review the minutes from our September 2nd meeting?
I have. This is Judge Parrish. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
And is there a second?
I second.
And we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the minutes?
I have just a brief note. Jeff Burkhart's name is misspelled in item 6E.
Thank you, Andrea.
And Judge Parrish, will you accept the amendment to the motion to approve the minutes to correct the spelling on Jeff's name?
Yes, I will amend my motion to accept the corrected spelling of Jeff's name. I will accept that.
And are there any other additions, deletions, or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none and scrolling through the screen, I don't see any hands coming up. So all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Judge Parrish, sorry, I was seeing clapping. I thought it was a hand. With that, Ray, if you'd give us a overview of the proposal we've received for corporate counsel for RPDO corporate.
So the members in the meeting book received a letter from Matt Wade at the Underwood firm that outlines the proposal. In your, I believe in your previous meeting book, you had a chance to review the, I guess it's more of an informational letter about the Underwood firm. And so the engagement letter presents, I believe, two options for the board in terms of retaining counsel. I asked Matt if he would join the meeting for informational purposes at this point, only to answer questions about the nature of their representation or their proposed representation and the fee arrangements that he has listed there, and so that he would be able to answer the members' questions about that if they had any. But there are essentially two options. I have a little background noise, I'm sorry. There are essentially two options for the members, a straight hourly basis or a retainer. From my other lifetime, I know a little bit about these kind of retainer agreements, and I will just say that I think everyone on the board anticipates a fairly high level of engagement with legal counsel at this point early in this corporate life, and as we set up processes and structures for the corporation, but that hopefully that need will ramp down somewhat. I think it will be an open question in the future, and Matt specifically raised this with me, as if it's whether or not we would want counsel to attend each meeting. My answer to him, my opinion only, was that we probably would want him attending these early meetings, but that at some point it might become unnecessary, but that's certainly at the pleasure of the board. But the two options that are reflected there, it would seemingly be a strict hourly basis would be much higher initially because of the fairly intense need we will have for counsel. But over the long term, I think that would level out. And then there is a kind of a retainer structure that I guess would the only question I would have would be what might not be covered under the retainer agreement. But it's, at least in my view, two straightforward options that the board has in terms of how they want to retain and ultimately the involvement they want from counsel. And Bill, I have Matt here to answer questions for the board. He may want to clarify things that I've said as well, but that's at least how I see the options that the board has.
And Matt, I'm sure there may be some questions for you, but is there anything either on clarifying from what Ray raised or any other issues that you'd like to bring up before we open it to other questions?
No, I think that Ray covered it very well. I think one of the issues that Ray mentioned about what wouldn't be covered under the retainer. Let me go ahead and address that if I can. It is a little bit of, I guess, subjective, if you will, on what isn't covered under a retainer. But what I normally do with my retainers, when you say it'll cover attending all the meetings, regularly scheduled meetings, and if there were special meetings that had to be called, numerous meetings that had to be called, we might have to reassess that. But as far as routine matters that people might call and have issues on, those are things that can be answered very easily without a lot of research and a lot of time spent trying to find the answer. Examples might be, how do we word this on the agenda to comply with the Open Meetings Act? Can we do X, Y, and Z under the Open Meetings Act? Those are most common questions that I get from my clients that obviously fall underneath the retainer and are very simple to answer, or something because of my experience are easy to answer and it doesn't take a lot of time to research and go after. But to try to get some clarity to that particular issue, that's what I would suggest. Other than that, I think that Ray covered it very well.
Do any members of the board have any questions for Matt? And let me ask one question that, since we're in sort of a interesting transition period, RPDO is still operating its day-to-day as a division of Lubbock County. Currently, all of RPDO's fiscal resources are with Lubbock County. So if we were to decide to engage your team, would there be an issue if we were not to be able to, and would we be incurring interest costs if we were not able to pay for services until after the 1st of January when our operating funds transfer over from Lubbock County to RPDO corporate?
No, I don't think that'd be an issue, and I don't think we would charge any interest on that. If you ended up retaining me in the Underwood Law Firm now, and if you couldn't actually pay, we can certainly work that out, that there'd be no interest charges until the RPDO actually is a functioning entity after the first of the year. That's not an issue.
Yes, Ray.
I just wanted to make sure that the board knew, at least from the staff perspective, that we're going to operate under the board's directives, obviously, but we're at a point where we frequently, kind of in our meetings and our discussions about executing all of these initial steps, that I feel like, and I want the board to know that we, at least at this point, feel like there's going to be frequent occasions where we may need a 10-minute call with counsel to say, we want to make sure we're doing this particular thing correctly, or that in preparation of the agenda for the next meeting. So I think those would be, at least for the moment, it would be fair to say frequently. And then that's another thing that I think would level out eventually, is we would kind of know the process and get comfortable with that. But initially, there are lots of things we're just not certain about, and we would definitely be asking counsel for advice on that.
And that actually leads to a question I had for you, Ray. Do we have a staff recommendation on whether you're recommending the straight hourly or the retainer plus hourly rate option?
Oh, and I'll tell the members we did not make recommendations on this particular agenda simply because we didn't know what to recommend. I think this is strictly just an opinion based upon what I kind of anticipate, but I think ultimately the straight hourly basis might be better from a financial aspect for the corporation. even though we may pay higher initial cost in the startup and all of the associated wheels that have to be invented here. I think that in the long run, those things might not be needed quite to the same level that they would be initially. That's only my opinion, and I don't know whether the retainer agreement is subject to being revisited at a later point, but at least initially, it might seem like we're paying much higher amounts, but that ultimately our need for counsel's advice would decrease over time and make the hourly basis more economical. But that's really truly just a guess.
Andrea, did I see a hand go up?
Yeah. And this is actually a question more for you, Bill and Ray. Our bylaws only require us to meet quarterly, and obviously, like, we've already met twice this month, we're meeting more frequently. How many meetings do you anticipate where you are going to need board action to move forward this fall? Because to me, like, that also goes into, if part of what's built into the retainer is attending meetings once a month, like, are we having, like, how frequently do you think we're going to meet in the short term?
And my thought is, much like you said, we're going to have a whole lot more in the near term. I think we're going to be getting to quarterly. It's just a question of how soon we get there. I anticipate we probably have another meeting in probably a couple of weeks to follow up on the pending from this one. And then we may be getting toward monthly, and then through the end of the year, and then moving on toward quarterly as we actually get our RPDO up and running, just depending on the issues and the actions we've got to take to get everything in place. Ray, what's your thought?
Well, I mean, based upon the agenda that the board has in front of it tonight, we anticipate that some of those are discussion only items, and it a little bit turns on how the board wants to proceed on some of those issues. The issue, for instance, you'll see in your agenda of liability insurance and workers' compensation. I think those are discussions that need to be had with counsel when the board retains counsel about the various provisions, policy limits, any exclusions that may apply. And so in a way, I think that a meeting 2 weeks from now or in a couple of weeks from now will be very necessary. You know, if, you know, Mr. Wade's firm has not been retained, but if they were retained at this meeting, you know, we have a question about an agenda item, which is the employer identification number. And we need the advice of counsel on which entity type to select as just one example. And so he may or may not be prepared to answer that question as to what the appropriate selection would be. So if we were to assume that he is not ready to answer that, we'll need a meeting in fairly short order to obtain the employer identification number, which then facilitates the, you know, any bank accounts or any other corporate financial matters. That's, in my view, step one, is to have that employer identification number. And so I do think that frequent meetings will be needed between now and the end of the year. As we go through further developments with TAC on our insurance questions or liability insurance questions, I would anticipate the need for fairly frequent meetings. They may be short. We certainly hope this one is. I guess that's the best opinion I could get under kind of what I would say normal operations. I think we will be fine with quarterly meetings, and the need for an emergency, if you will, meeting is pretty limited, at least in my view. And so I don't know if that answers your question, Bill, but that's the best, I think that's the best answer I can give you.
And Jeff, Commissioner McCabe, y'all have also been integral parts of the transition committee. Did you have any insight or suggestions?
No, I think that all sounds right to me. I think with it, we would probably have another meeting in a couple of weeks and then meet maybe monthly till the first of the year and then get back to quarterly. But I think it's going to be intense for a little more intensive for the next few months. I think that's right.
If I,
And I would agree with that. I think it's critical up front, working with our council to nail down some of these questions and to be very intense working together over the next few months. Once January 1st gets here, I think it'll be much easier. So yeah, I would agree with everything Jeff said.
and Bill, I would tell you that in a conversation with Matt about those issues, he has dealt with entities that are created under 431 of the Transportation Code before. And so at least to a certain degree, we're not inventing every wheel. It doesn't mean that he does not need to research and explore different issues, but he has represented these entities before, including, as my understanding, in litigation. And so I think that, I think that we do, in selecting that firm, we are drawing upon some experience that will benefit us in the long term, because he has dealt with some of the issues that I'm sure we're going to present to him between now and January 1, and obviously after that point.
And Bill, I would just say, I have talked to a few people, and Mr. Wade and his firm have a great reputation. I think given what Ray's talking about, that an hourly rate in the long term makes sense. And that's about it.
Any other discussion or any other questions on the issue of counsel for the RPDO Inc.? Hearing none, does someone want to make a motion? Do we want to proceed with the hourly rate? Do we want to look at the retainer? What's the will of the board?
Bill, let me ask one thing here. A question I have is, I absolutely agree with Jeff's observations about the firm and Matt personally. I wonder though if we have any responsibility to have solicited bids or done any of that other kind of thing. Commissioner McKay, you may, or Judge Parrish may can direct us there. I just don't want to miss something that should have been done early going.
This would be considered a professional service. So it's not like going at the bid for cars or, some particular items, capital items. So professional services is something that does not have to go out to bid for, whether it's for attorneys, engineers, or architects.
If you don't mind, I don't. It's a little interesting to give my 2 cents worth, but I'm very familiar with the Professionals Procurement Act and very familiar with this process. You actually cannot go out for bid as far as trying to determine based on price what you want to do with your legal services. You can go out and get requests for qualifications. And then at that point in time, after you get who you determine to be the most qualified professional corporation that you want to go with, at that point in time, you would negotiate. If you aren't able to come up with a contract, then you go to the next most qualified, et cetera. But you don't actually, it's not really a bid process. It's going out for RFQs. And you just want to make sure that if you do that, it's not a problem, and we'd be glad to sit there and respond to it. And I'm sure there'd be other firms that would as well. We certainly have done that in the past. So if you want to do that, that certainly is no problem for me or for the Underwood Law Firm. I would understand you wanting to do that. So just it wouldn't be a true bid process. It would be going out for requests for qualifications.
Thank you, Matt.
Yes, the RFQ would be that what we would need for professional services. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I know that Mr. Wade is familiar with the government code and that offers an exemption to governmental entities and quasi-governmental entities to be able to bypass, as it were, for professional services. This would certainly qualify for that.
And Mr. Chairman, I think Judge Livingston had a question or a comment.
Thank you, Jeff. Judge?
Thank you. I was just going to say that I think we're in kind of a unique situation here because time is of the essence. And as we are just kind of beginning to understand what this new entity is going to look like and how to set it up, decisions have to be made. The 3-hour board meeting last 2 weeks ago was an indication of the work that has to get done. This firm comes with the recommendations of many and with experience in this area. I think at this point, since in my view, time is of the essence, that we proceed on the motion. I would vote in favor of it because I think we need to get down to the business of setting it up and getting it done and putting things in place right now because we don't have very many months left before the first of the year. And I'm sure Mr. Wade will understand it if we decide to fire him if we don't like what he does. But I expect that he will do his thing and we will appreciate it and it's going to all be peachy and wonderful. But I think we don't have a lot of time to go out and look for others. They come with high recommendations and great experience from all that we've discussed over the last 2 meetings. I say we proceed with the motion on the table.
Thank you, Judge. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Oh, and one clarification, Judge. Are you moving to do the hourly rate or the retainer?
There was already a motion on the floor, but perhaps I was mistaken. I thought you asked for a motion and that we had one and that then we started discussing it and asking questions, but I may have been mistaken. Perhaps the secretary could clarify.
Elaine, did we have a motion at this point?
I don't believe so.
Bill, looking at our minutes, the last board meeting, we voted unanimously to authorize Ray to enter into negotiations with Underwood Farm. So and I think we gave him the authorization to choose and to make negotiations.
Correct. He gave us 2 options, Commissioner. Just wanted to be sure we're clear on our record which one we're going with, whether it's the retainer or the straight hourly. Judge?
I agree with Mr. Keith's observation that while it might cost more hourly up front because of the upfront cost, in the long run, it's likely to be less expensive. So I would move that we retain Underwood Firm and Mr. Wade as the partner in charge at the hourly rate set forth in the proposal.
Thank you, Judge. Do we have a second then?
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and I think Andrea, you were the second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And actually, one item we do need to clarify as I'm looking back at the engagement agreement. We need to authorize someone to execute the agreement on behalf of RPDO. And so since Ray has been working with Matt, we've authorized him before to take specific actions on behalf of the RPDO. I'd entertain a motion to authorize Ray Keith to enter into the retainer agreement on behalf of the RPDO with the Underwood Law Firm as authorized by the board.
I'd make that motion. Okay, good.
And I think we had a motion and a second. All in favor?
Bill?
Yes,
Bill,
sir.
just
Ray?
for Elaine's benefit, could we clarify the motion and the second?
And I think Judge Livingston seconded. Who was the motion?
Yeah.
Is that you, Jeff?
Yes, sir. This is Jeff. Yeah, I moved.
Okay.
Okay. So now we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Welcome aboard, Matt. We're glad to have you as our counsel. So,
Thank you. Glad to be here.
and we are even more glad to have your advice and counsel at this point. As you can tell, our last board meeting ran a little long and we really needed some insight, as most of us are used to working in the criminal world, not in the civil world. Our next item on the agenda is our corporate officers. We need to elect our chair, our vice chair, our treasurer, and our corporate secretary. Andrea?
So, Bill, I went back to look at the bylaws and I think you're the chair, like per the bylaws. So we may not need to vote on that, even though I'm having a hard time finding the place in the bylaws where I read that today.
And that's what we were thinking last time, but then we couldn't find it in our last meeting.
I read it today and then I went and opened the new.
Andrea, for what it's worth, my recollection is that the bylaws stated that Bill would be the chair, the initial chair, and that the board could vote a different chair. For my 2 cents, I would keep Mr. Cox as the chair, though.
It's certainly not going to hurt to have a motion to
Right, that's true.
do so. So
And so at this point, what's the will of the board on how?
Just for clarity's sake, it's in the definition section, which is why it's so hard to find it. The definition for chair, you're named.
it's because they were setting the model by Bill.
I'm that way before, but
Could I clarify just what the officers are? So it's chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, or 2 different people, or one person that serves both roles?
we have 2 different offices listed, so I would think it would be 2 different people.
Thank you.
And so looking at it, how does the board want to do? Do we want to do nominations from the floor? Do we want to put together a slate? What's the board's preference on moving forward?
I have a suggestion that all of the people that have been on the board longer than I have should volunteer for one of these offices.
I would nominate Mr. Cox as chair. I would nominate, if that's needed, I'd nominate, trying to think who'd be willing to serve as vice. But Commissioner McKay, if you'd be willing to serve as vice chair, I would nominate you.
I'd be honored to do so.
Do we have any other nominees for, let's take chair and vice chair at this point then? Hearing none, is there a second?
Second.
And the second was Judge Livingston. Sorry, I'm scrolling back and forth on the Brady Bunch. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Commissioner McKay.
Bill, can we clarify?
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
Mr. Burkhart made that motion. Bill?
He did.
Yes, sir.
And then now at this point, we need to get a treasurer and a secretary. Do we have any but one who feels they have an expertise in financial matters that would be interested in serving as our treasurer?
I agree with Judge Livingston that it should be somebody more than the rookies.
Can an ex officio, can Jeff be a officer if he's ex officio? Just because he knows the grant money side better than anybody else.
I don't think there are any limits on ex officio's capacities in our bylaws.
Okay.
And of course, this comes up with a great time to have council here.
Right. I'm
Matt, you see-
scrolling madly, right? But yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid I've read your articles of incorporation, but I haven't read your bylaws. I'm not sure I have a copy of your bylaws yet. And normally you would not have an ex officio member serve as an officer. Many times ex officio members, sometimes ex officio members are non-voting, but I don't think that's the case here. Or I don't know whether that's the case here.
That is not the case here. They are
Okay.
voting members.
Okay, well then I don't think that it matters then at that point in time. I think an ex officio member absolutely can be a treasurer or a secretary. And I would say this, just because you're named treasurer or you're named secretary doesn't mean that you have to have any particular skill in being a treasurer or a secretary. You can always, they're just the ones that are going to ultimately be signing off on certain documents that require their signatures. So don't exclude yourself if you think that you don't have any type of expertise in financial. You're more than welcome to serve in that capacity.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, just to comment real quick, just given my role at TIDC and the fact that we fund RPDO, it does make me a little bit nervous about actually serving as treasurer on top of that. I'm happy to serve as secretary if nobody else is willing, but the treasurer position makes me a little bit nervous for just potential conflicts.
Yes.
Understandable. Let's see. Rick, would you be interested? Judge Livingston, I see a hand.
I was going to nominate Mr. Burkhart to be the secretary.
I think I saw that coming.
And I will second your nomination. Do we have any other nominees for secretary? Hearing none. All in favor of Jeff Burkhart as our secretary?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations, Jeff. You just made Elaine very happy to have somebody to help with them.
Look at the elation on his face.
Thank you.
Jeff,
So-
she's emailing you her notes right now.
So, Andrea, would you be interested in taking on the treasurer's duties?
My only question about that is when I've been on a nonprofit board, it was helpful to have the treasurer someplace physically proximate to the office because they had to sign banking instruments. If that is anticipated to be the case, it might be better to have somebody in Lubbock. Otherwise, I'd be happy to serve.
And Matt, is that one we can handle through board order with authorizing someone to serve, or are we going to need the treasurer to be able to sign it?
Well, it'll all depend probably on the bank, which officers they're going to require to sign what. And again, maybe I haven't seen your bylaws, so I'm a little bit at a disadvantage to advising you specifically on that. That is exactly what I was thinking about, though, is that there might be some practicalities with having the treasurer be somebody in Lubbock if there is going to have to be some stuff. But of course, anything anymore, everything's done electronically, and it's not as big an issue as it used to be in the past as far as having somebody local. But.
So let me ask, go ahead.
Just out of an abundance of caution, the board could revisit this. If the board contemplates a meeting in a couple of weeks, even though they name someone now, once council has had the benefit of looking at the bylaws, he might change his advice on that matter, that the board could revisit it at the next meeting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. you can always change who your officer is if it's becoming impractical for someone to serve.
So then with that understanding, if nominated, Andrea, would you be willing to be the treasurer? Then I will nominate Andrea. Is there a second?
Second.
I would second.
Any other nominees? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations, Andrea. We now have a slate of officers. So that brings up our next item, which one where we definitely needed some advice from council. Ray, would you walk us through the issues on the employer ID number?
So the members have, I believe in their meeting book again, the SS4 IRS form that needs to be completed in order to make the application for the employer identification number. And I apologize for referencing the previous meeting book, but I think that I've highlighted the blocks that at least cause some question that may need the advice of counsel as to the appropriate entity type. Our entity under the 431 of the Transportation Code at least touches upon 3 different entities. And I believe that we need to rely on the advice of counsel as to which entity should be in there, as well as the appropriate people to be designated in those positions. There is a responsible party on there that is listed, as well as a couple of other designations later in the form. And again, I will tell you that we simply forgot to bookmark the meeting book that you have. And so the SS4 form begins on page 14 of you're viewing it in, for instance, an Acrobat reader, it will be on page 14, but it lists item 3, which is the executor, administrator, trustee. 7A is the responsible party. 9A covers the entity type. 11 begins the date that business started, which is a question that may differ from the date that this corporation existed. And the date, item 15, the date that first wages, annuities were paid remains, I guess, an open question until we know the pay schedule for the new entity. But those are the open questions that I think may require the opinion of counsel before we, in order to seek that EIN.
Ray, did you send me a copy of the board book?
I thought I did, but I will send it right now. Matt, you're going to have an email in just a minute from Elaine Nowert that will have the meeting book in it as well.
It hasn't made it through yet, Ray, but let me say if I understand what the issue is as far as getting your EIN. You're wanting to know whether or not you're going to classify yourself as a nonprofit organization or a corporation, and who's going to be the named party that would be the primary person responsible for. Yes.
And I trust you'll get the meeting book here in just a minute, Matt. The SS4 form, item 3 lists an executor, administrator, or trustee care of name is how it's worded. And we are uncertain as to how that answers, or, you know, what is appropriate. The name of the responsible party is item 7 that we don't know. It does require an individual with a social security number. 9A is the entity type. We believe that we touch on a corporation. We believe that we touch on other nonprofit organization or state, local government. We think we fit any one of those 3. The item 11, the date that the business started or acquired, you know, this corporation came into existence this summer. And prior to your coming on board, the board set an operational date of January 1, 2021 as to when it will actually begin the practice of law, if you will, that we will formally transfer employees and assume case responsibility under the corporate entity. And then item 15 is the first date that wages were paid, which will be within the first 2 weeks of 2021. And so I hope that you receive that meeting book here shortly. It's been sent.
Yeah.
But those are the open questions as to the form. And again, with yours or the members' questions, I'm happy to clarify, but that completing the EIN form and obtaining that number is seminal to us proceeding on any of the other matters that we have.
Mr. Chair, if there's other business that you can go to that don't necessarily involve my legal advice, then please feel free to go ahead and skip to the next agenda item or to an agenda item to keep business going while I have a chance to just look at a couple of things right here.
Certainly. With that, Ray, would you give us the overview on where we're at on health insurance and the decisions we have pending?
So the members in your meeting book, the members have on page, I believe it will start on the Acrobat numbering, not necessarily it's from the Bates stamped page number, it's 13. On Acrobat, the numbering system for Acrobat, it is page 16. And so ultimately we have provided, subsequent to those pages, information for the board to consider on a couple of health insurance related decisions that have to be made. The first one, or the primary one, is the amount, if any, of corporate contribution towards employee health insurance. And I have Kathy Davenport is here in the meeting to give you an explanation of some of these things. Ultimately, Blue Cross Blue Shield via TAC requires a specific amount of money every month to be paid to them for our health coverage. The question before the board is how much of the total cost is borne by the corporation versus the various employees, depending on their selection of their coverage types. And so what we've attempted to give the board in the meeting book, if the board members will look at page, what's the best? It would be 19. 19, I believe, is going to be the best page for you to start. And what we're attempting as best we can to lay out for the board is what this is going to cost the corporation. If the board subsidizes nothing, if the board subsidizes 50% of that cost, board subsidizes 25%. Ultimately, the quotations that we've received from TAC are contingent upon the board fully paying, the corporation fully paying employee-only coverage. The variations beyond that would be employee plus children, employee plus spouse, employee plus family. And so the amount that the corporation takes versus the employee contribution is something that the board needs to determine tonight. And so what we've attempted to give you is a spreadsheet, I guess, that are examples of, excuse me, just one second.
Bill, when Ray's back, I mean, the big question I have is what's most comparable to what they have now?
Yeah, because I also, did we decide last time that we were gonna fund 100% employee for sure? Because is that what they're being, are they not contributing at all for employee only coverage now?
We did not make any decisions last time on how much we were going to fund. We just picked a plan last time. But Ray, sort of going along with Jeff's question, if you could clarify what the current subsidy is now so that we all know what we're at and being sure we're looking at an apples to apples.
And so it's a video conference, so you can't see me looking over at Elaine, but essentially under our existing plans with Aetna and Lubbock County, the employee only option, there is I guess I could only say a nominal contribution for employee only coverage if you reside in Lubbock County. If you do not reside in Lubbock County as an employee only participant, you pay a substantial amount toward your coverage. And so what the proposals that Blue Cross via TAC have presented to us assumes that the corporation fully funds employee only coverage across the board, because we no longer have the distinctions between a Lubbock resident employee and a Lubbock anywhere else resident employee. And so the proposals, and Kathy will correct me, but the proposals that have been given from TAC assume that the corporation is paying employee only coverage fully. The question the board has to decide is for those additional coverages, employee children, employee spouse, or employee family, what, if any, amount is the corporation paying toward those totals, if you will? And I don't know if I'm explaining that well.
Okay.
Kathy,
Sorry.
I know Andrea has a question, and so I'll defer to her, but I want to make sure that Kathy Davenport weighs in if I'm not explaining this correctly.
She's staying muted, so I'll ask my follow-up question while she's maybe unmuting. So I'm assuming that if RPDO picks up the full cost of employee only coverage for all of the employees who are outside of Lubbock, which is the majority of their employees, that is more expensive on the employee only side than what they are doing now. So what is the total amount that RPDO is paying for insurance? Just so, I mean, it's hard for me to look at these without knowing, is this like $200,000 more a year than we've been paying? Like it's hard. It's just not knowing what the total is now. Because I assume that bumping the out of Lubbock employees up is quite in itself expensive.
I mean,
and I was going to say, Ray, let me add part of it that having dealt with a county system that's self-funded, similar to how I understand Lubbock works, they have a flat fee per employee that is put in regardless of whether that employee elects not to do insurance, elects just to do themselves, includes themselves and spouse or themselves and family. So in some ways, the apple to apple doesn't really exist between this is where, as I understand it, putting this together for us, Ray and Elaine and Amy have been trying to get where it was looking at comparables. It's just like people in Lubbock County have one structure, whereas those who are outside of Lubbock County have a different structure in how their health insurance works. Is that Ray?
I'll say that that's true. And prior to this meeting, Amy and Elaine and I, we wanted to come up with a way to explain to the board that it's difficult to make an apples to apples comparison, if you will, between what we pay now and what we might pay in the future. One of those variables is that we do not know what 50 RPDO employees will choose in terms of employee only, employee spouse, employee family, those options. But I'm at that point, I'm going to defer to Amy or Elaine because they can tell you what our budgeted amount is currently under Lubbock County, but why that is not exactly, it doesn't exactly translate to what this corporation might pay for coverage. And I know Kathy may also weigh in here, but I would probably defer to Elaine or Amy to explain more of why it's not necessarily a direct translation.
Yeah, the information that I got from Lubbock County was kind of convoluted. Basically, how they do the budgeting is they get this amount for employee only, and then that number is multiplied by how many employees we have right now, and that's our budget. Our budget for FY21 for health insurance is a little over 414,000. And that's just based on this number, like what it was before, it was like 7,800 or 7,500 times how many employees we have on our staff right now. And that's how Lubbock County does the budget. So it's really convoluted, but that's what our number is. It's a little over 414,000.
So, and I will tell all the members that I am not an accountant and I am somewhat mathematically challenged. And I frequently look at Amy and Elaine with really quizzical looks about this for them to dumb this down for me. But the Lubbock County budget assumptions and the budget numbers that we have from Lubbock County are not, they don't necessarily reflect the current number of employees that take coverage or any particular type of coverage, or that could possibly take a potential coverage. We could have, theoretically, we could have 50 employees take employee family coverage, which would skew the models that we've attempted to give you. And so it's really difficult to give the members a simple answer to the question of how much do we pay now and how much are we going to pay under this proposal. And I hope we've explained the vagary of this as best we can. And I don't know if Kathy, if there's something here you can help clarify that you feel like you need to.
No, not really. It's just whenever, regardless of it being a self-funded entity or for us, our regularly participating in our pool counties like y'all will be, whenever you go in to do your budget, you definitely normally want to account for every single employee funding that at least employee only amount, because if not, you will not have enough to cover your claims. You have to cover that much at least. Go ahead, Ray.
My interpretation of that for the members is that No, I'm not. My interpretation of that for the members is that everything that the Association of Counties or the Blue Cross through them as quoted assumes that the corporation fully bears the cost of employee-only coverage. And if the corporation were to deviate from that, then I assume that TAC would have to recalculate. Perhaps, I don't know, but perhaps they would have to recalculate those prices, if you will. And so if the board were to assume the examples I think we've given you are 50% of those additional costs or 25% of those additional costs or zero employer contribution to those costs, I think beyond that, there is not a lot of certainty for the board on what the ultimate tab is for this. I mean, we will have a lot more certainty in year 2 than we do year 1 because we'll have some historical data to base that upon. We've wrestled with how to explain this for the last week or so, and I don't know, Elaine, I mean, is there anything else we can explain here?
Can I also just say Judge Livingston has had a question for a while, might as well.
Judge,
I'm used to being patient and listening. It's all good, but thank you. So I have a question and a comment. The question is whether or not for those that currently receive as an employee benefit of working for Lubbock County, does Lubbock County subsidize the children, spouse, family cost to employees, or does Lubbock County only pay for employee only coverage? That's my question. And then I have a comment after that. Yes, what's the answer to that?
I think I can give you the answer, and I don't mind speaking personally about how it works for me. And I stand to be corrected by Commissioner McKay or Judge Parrish, but ultimately, I have employee family coverage. And out of each of my paychecks, we are paid every 2 weeks. And so out of each of my 2 paychecks, $170 is taken out for that insurance coverage. And so there is, if you compare that to the actual cost of my coverage, Lubbock County is subsidizing a certain amount of that coverage. And so there is a subsidy now. I don't know if I can quantify that into a percentage, but I can tell you that there is a subsidy in that amount. And that is true for employee spouse, employee children, and where I am, employee family.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So here's my comment in terms of the policy decisions on the. I would hope that we decide to cover every employee of this corporation. So we ought to be providing as a benefit to employees, employee-only coverage as a fundamental first step. Then I think the question is, well, should we also subsidize at some percentage, 2% to 50%, it looks like, are the proposals, what it would cost employees to cover a spouse or children? And I think what I hear you saying is that we're struggling to understand even what to recommend to the board. A, we don't know how many people that involves. B, we don't know how much that's going to cost. And C, we're just guessing. So it seems to me, have a couple of options. If we all agree that we can and should support our employees by paying them a benefit, providing them a health insurance benefit that covers the employee, then I think what we should do is make that decision first and foremost. We know what that's going to cost, how many people that involves, and let's get that done. Let's then survey our employees and find out what their pleasure might be. And then we don't have to guess. We will know if offered and no subsidy, would you want to do it? If offered and some subsidy, would you, and just ask in a survey what it is they, might opt for, if obviously lots of variables, how much it's gonna cost, blah, blah, blah. But, some people aren't going to need it because they're going to be covered as dependent on a spouse's plan or whatever. So instead of guessing, I'm just suggesting that we provide it to all employees, and then we survey employees to determine what their needs might be. And then armed with that information, we are in a better position to do pricing and to make some policy decisions about these percentages of subsidy, if any. That's my thought.
Ray, I see your hand up. And Judge, I apologize for not getting to you sooner earlier too.
No problem. I'm used to being on page 3. It's all good.
I'll happily defer to the members first.
Well, I had one question on that, which actually is for Kathy. I understood we had some time constraints. If we were to make a decision on what we're doing for employees, is it feasible for TAC for us to come back in another couple of weeks with a decision on the employee and spouse, or employee and children, or employee and family? Or did the timetables allow us that much flexibility?
Y'all have a little bit of flexibility with that. Our absolute drop dead date of getting y'all's paperwork in, signed and completed, and into us, and us being able to input it into the system is October 6th. So that's three weeks. So, I mean, you've got a little bit of flexibility there, but not much. As far as Judge Livingston's question about can you survey employees, I just want to caution you, because some of that may fall into the HIPAA guidelines and privacy. So I wouldn't, I was able to give Ray and Elaine and them kind of what employees already have as far as the different tiers. That's going to give you kind of an idea. So, I mean, you might be able to get a little bit closer on an estimate off of that.
And let me,
No, sorry.
go ahead.
Just 2 follow-up questions. My understanding was that early October deadline was about whether was not pertinent to the employer contribution question. Did I miss last time? Is it that decision about what percentage we're picking up could come later? That the October 6th deadline was about, we're purchasing the plan, you're gonna survey folks. Now, they may not be able to elect their coverage till they know what we're paying, but I just want to make sure I didn't understand that. And then also, are you saying that this like 5734 is coming from some actual data and not just like that correspond? Because I didn't understand that at first.
Yeah, and on that October 6th date, yes, that is, we have to have completed paperwork into us by then, because we need a minimum of 60 days to be able to get all of the enrollment completed, get the applications done by the employees who are wanting to enroll, get all of that in. That way they will have their insurance cards by January 1st for them to be able to utilize services.
Now, let me ask you something when you're saying we have 3 weeks, because I'm afraid I may have been hearing something different. Is that 3 weeks for us to make an election, or is that 3 weeks for the election and for the employees to do their open enrollment?
No, that's just the about 3 weeks to get this part of the paperwork done. Ray and I and them have been talking about dates in October to do the open enrollment. But yeah, no, we need signed paperwork by October 6th.
Bill, and I want to make sure I understand, but when TAC does these large presentations to our organization, I mean, the question, and I think Andrea alluded to this, but the question is that employees are going to have is how much does this cost me personally? And so I think my understanding is TAC needs to be able to present to the employees that if you select employee only or employee family or employee children or any other option, I think that TAC wants to be able to tell them this is the amount that will be deducted from your paycheck every 2 weeks. Which, and I'm not sure that I'm right here, but I think that is what the board decision, that's the impact of the board acting or not acting, is the ability of TAC to tell them this is what it's going to cost you in terms of a paycheck deduction.
Let me ask. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, do we know what the current, I mean, I thought Ray said he didn't know what the current percentage was that was subsidized. Does anybody, do the commissioners, for example, at Lubbock County have any idea what percentage is subsidized for employees with?
So I'm gonna defer to others.
Have that information in my office, but I'm at home for the Zoom meeting, but yes, Lubbock County does subsidize our health benefits. It's a kind of depending on the percentage. That is a number that we can get. I can get with our director of human resources and get Ray and Elaine those numbers and those percentages fairly quickly.
And I can also provide the percentages that Taylor County subsidizes our employees. And I can have my Kathy send it to you, Ray, Elaine. And Kathy Davenport, do you have access to our percentage?
Sorry, Commissioner Statler. I think I can pull it up. I think we have y'all's.
Okay.
I would just need to be able to log into the server.
Okay. If not, I'll have my Kathy send that to Ray and Elaine, and I can get that information sent to y'all tomorrow morning. I have a meeting with her first thing, and I'll make that first agenda item that she and I will talk about, and we'll focus that information to you. And Bill, we can compare what y'all do with Lubbock County and what we do with Taylor County, and I think that'll kind of show us the road we need to go on.
I agree.
Thank you, Commissioner Judge. Matt, did I see you were ready to go back on looking at the EIN?
Are we done with this item or are we going to come back to it
Well,
today?
from where I was hearing is, depending on the will of the board, it sounds like there's a desire for more information to find out what the rates are for Lubbock. And I see Ray waving at me, but I thought it was a desire to get more information before we make the call. But Ray, I'm seeing the panicked hand gesture.
And obviously the will of the board here is, I mean, obviously is what matters, but I want to make sure that the folks at TAC have the information they need. And I don't know, I'm not willing to say what they have to know to give accurate information to the employees in early October, because that's the date we're looking at for those informational meetings. And so I just want to make sure that we get whatever TAC needs to then relay to employees on the proper timeline. And I'm not 100% sure what that is.
And I just have one more clarifying question, and this is really for staff more before we go on. I just want to make sure that I understand that if we did this 25% subsidy, that gets us to 415. I mean, of the dependents, 100% employee, 25, which is the closest number to what RPDO is currently budgeted for health in terms of expense to the entity. But I'm assuming that that means that out of pocket is going to go up for the Lubbock employees and will go significantly down for the out of Lubbock employees. I just want to make sure I understand that that is in fact the scenario. And our choice is either to pay more totally as an organization in order to keep the Lubbock employees closer to their current amounts, or ask the Lubbock employees to pay more while giving a break to everybody else.
Ray?
I think that Andrea has it correct, that under any of these proposals, and I'll again defer to Elaine and Amy, but under any of these proposals, Lubbock County resident employees will pay more. And the relief will come to the out of Lubbock County employees who have for now 12 years paid considerably more. And so I think that you're correct that Lubbock County employees are going to pay more. There's a variable in that based upon, you know, if we're talking actual impact, there's a variable there depending on whether or not they funded their HSA account, because they would no longer be funding an HSA. And so they would get back that payroll deduction while paying more for a premium. And so we've tried to talk through how that works out as to where it's a wash and where employees pay more and where employees pay less. But I think generally the employees in Lubbock are going to pay more under any of these variations. And again, I'll happily step aside for Elaine or Amy on that question.
Bill, can I ask one more question? Just one more clear before we move to a different agenda item.
Sure.
I just want to see if I'm reading this right. Between these two options, 25% and 50%, the bottom line numbers are roughly 415,000 and 445,000. So we're talking about between 25% and 50% subsidies. We're talking really only a $30,000 difference, which is, you know, let me see. I mean, if my math is correct, I mean, somewhere around, you know, less than 0.5% of the organizational budget. I mean, relatively small difference between the two. Is that right?
From the staff perspective, I think that's true. The only variable that remains is how many employees choose what, if you will. How many employees that may be employee only now switch to employee family because it's a better option for them, and that will remain an unknown. I think that from the staff perspective, as best we can calculate, the coverage under this plan, I think regardless of the corporate contribution amounts, is going to be slightly more than it is now, but we don't think that's a drastic amount. But that is truly a best guess based on our current participation numbers and what we would expect employees to choose in the next couple of months.
Judge Livingston and then Dean Rucker.
Well, I don't know that we're going to get a whole lot more information that's going to make that much difference to the decision we have to make beyond what we have. I mean, it'd be nice to know what Lubbock County is doing and what Taylor County is doing, but the bottom line is we have to make a corporate decision about what we want to do and what we can afford to do. The question about how much we can afford is going to remain an unknown because there are too many variables that we don't know the answer to, and we will know that answer before October 6th. So I think it would behoove us, frankly, to make sure that we don't miss that deadline and that we allow for the open enrollment to get underway, and then we'll know what's what. We can change this decision after we've made it in year 2, but if it really is a difference of roughly $30,000 given our overall budget, I would move that we cover all employees 100% of their cost, and that we contribute 50% of, and subsidize their other cost by 50% in year one. And then we revisit that in year two. If it's too much, we can make an adjustment. If it's not enough, we can make that adjustment. If it's just right, we can keep it. But I think for year one, that we ought to make it happen, and that we ought to try to do as much as we can. It's not significantly different in terms of the dollar amount cost, given what we know. And if we need to make a mid-course correction next year, we can do that. That's my motion.
Let me clarify one thing, Dean Rucker, before we go to move forward. Judge Livingston, I just want to clarify your motion applies to both the health insurance and then the dental plan as well. So we're dealing with both with the 50% subsidy.
Oh, I didn't look at the dental, but yes, why not?
It's the difference in the dental plan is $600 between a 25 and 50% subsidy.
Definitely include dental.
Okay, Dean Rucker, I'm sorry.
Well, you have to approach this thing from a principled perspective, and we want to do right by the employees. Certainly, paying 50, contributing 50% toward their employee spouse, employee family, I think is the proper thing to do. It looks like it could be affordable, and I think from a principled approach, I second Judge Livingston's motion.
So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Bill, I just said I talked to Edmund Colfax, our grants manager. We reviewed this, and as one of the funding agencies, I think we could very easily support that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. So, any further discussion? And hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And then also, I believe we need to do a motion to authorize someone to execute the documents with TAC for the plan. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to authorize Ray Keith to effectuate the board order to do a 50% subsidy, 100% for employee and a 50% subsidy for the employee's family, spouse, and or children plans as previously authorized by the board for health insurance coverage with TAC.
I'll make that motion.
And I would second it, also including the dental as well.
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying, Commissioner McKay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay. Matt, if we can come back to you on the EIN.
Bill,
Ray?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to make sure that we're clear. And I apologize for the lateness of sending this out to the members, but I believe there are a couple of other ancillary issues to the health insurance plan that they're not going to be evident to the members from the meeting book that involve COBRA issues with the organization. And I'm going to look to Kathy to make sure that I'm correct on that, but actually TAC needs a couple of other decisions related to health insurance. Is that right, Kathy?
Yes, that is correct.
And so what I emailed the members today, and again, I apologize that it was late, but ultimately the board needs to make a couple of decisions about, I think, administrative things, who could administrate these things. And as Kathy has explained them to us, they are fairly, I hate to say simple, but they're fairly simple. They do involve cost. But are you comfortable, Kathy, with explaining those two decisions to the board?
Sure. The first one's going to be that I'll talk about is your COBRA administration. That's coverage for the employees. They have the option to maintain the insurance after they leave the organization for a certain time period. We offer two options. You, the organization, can administer that, which all that is the system that we use that all of this will be processed through. The person within your organization enters that termination into the system. They send out the legal paperwork notifying them of their right of COBRA insurance. That one, there is no cost, additional cost involved with self-administration on that. They can choose, y'all can choose to have Blue Cross Blue Shield administer that, which the difference is the person on your end enters in the termination, then Blue Cross Blue Shield is the one who takes care of everything else, including collecting payments, anything like that. For that, it's $150 each time someone signs up for COBRA. So it's $150 flat charge per person signing up. And one of the things that Ray asked me whenever we were talking about this is pros and cons of either having Blue Cross administer it or having it being a self-administration. If Blue Cross administers the COBRA and the ex-employee has an issue with a claim or getting medication, we cannot assist them with that. If it is self-administration, then if there is any type of issue with the claim regarding medical claim or prescription, we can contact Blue Cross Blue Shield and Navitas to help them get the issue fixed. Personal opinion, self-administration is the way to go.
Bill, I will tell you from staff's perspective, having thought about that, I'm going to hand it over to Elaine, but as the system administrator, she's probably going to be the one dealing with that. And I think in terms of a recommendation, that's going to be hers, but I'm going to defer to her on that.
So I do think that the self-administration is the way to go with that, just because we would have the benefit of TAC behind us. And if we did not do the self-administration, we would be responsible for all those other things. So I think the self-administration is the way to go.
Any questions or discussion on the COBRA self-administration or COBRA options and which direction? Judge Livingston?
I move we do whatever you call it to make this COBRA happen with the self-administration option.
Second.
I don't know what that's called.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, was it just COBRA or did we have some other decisions we needed to make, Ray and Kathy?
I think there is one additional one regarding retiree coverage. Is that correct, Kathy?
Actually, there's a couple. There's the retiree coverage. This is for pre-65 and post-65 employees leaving the organization. You have the option to let them remain on your insurance. Again, that's either covering a portion of it or not covering a portion of it. I will tell you, most of our groups do allow pre-65 employees, leaving employees to remain on the health insurance, but it's at their cost. The counties do not contribute to that. That's just something we offer.
Kathy, is there a silver option available for retirees?
Yes, there is. What Commissioner Statler is referring to is our County Choice Silver Plan, And it is for those retirees that are 65 or Medicare eligible that are leaving the organization. It's a Medicare supplement plan that they do. And they are not eligible for that until they are age 65 and Medicare eligible, and completely leave the organization. Unfortunately, it's a very good program because we're able to provide Medicare supplements at a lower cost. With this one, if this is something y'all are interested in, we can implement at any time. It's not just during renewal. I mean, during onboarding or renewal. They've kind of put a stipulation in there that we cannot start a county choice silver plan unless the organization has someone that's going to be an automatic enrollment. But I would be more than happy to start sending over information regarding that program.
So then, is this a decision we need to make right now, or is this more informational?
The county choice silver is more informational. As far as allowing, especially the pre-65 retirees, you allowing them to remain on the plan, that's a decision we really need as soon as possible, if tonight at all possible.
And if I'm understanding correctly, at this point, we don't have any retirees because they would be under current Lubbock County. This would only be anyone who retires in the future.
Correct.
Just
And
for informational purposes of the board, I can only speculate that we will be addressing the retirement question early on in the corporate existence, if you will.
And do you and your team have a recommendation on how to proceed with it, Ray?
I think our recommendation would be that they be allowed to participate at their own cost without the corporate subsidy or the corporate payment, that be an employee cost that they would.
Any questions or discussion?
I do. Ray, is this for pre-65, post-65, or both?
I think my recommendation would be for both, but I just want to make sure that the board understands the distinction.
And hearing, did someone have a comment? Hearing none, is there a motion?
I have a question for Kathy. I believe you said that many of your counties offer this to pre-65s. Is that not true for post-65s? And is that because it's going to affect their premium scoring?
Most of the time, one of the things whenever dealing with Texas counties, it is unbelievable the number of elected officials that have gone to work for that county since high school, and they've continued their employment. I've got multiple judges in my territory that have worked for the county for the last 30 years, and they're in their 50s. So we don't see a lot on the post-65 side because at post-65, they're already Medicare eligible and they're enrolled in Medicare. So it's kind of, they're double covered, and it's not as good a benefit whenever they're double covered like that.
Okay.
Any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands going up. Does the board have a feeling on which way we want to go? Do we want to allow people to stay with the plan at their own expense, or do we want to look at another option? Or what's everyone leaning toward?
And Ray, I could not hear your recommendation.
My recommendation was that the board approve the employee option, that they could continue that coverage at their own cost
Okay,
for both pre-65 and post-65 employees.
then I would make that motion.
I'll second it.
So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Kathy, what's the next item we need to look at?
The next item that we need a decision on is participating with the Affordable Care Act reporting and tracking services. And this is a service that we provide to our members, to our groups for free. On the requirement for employers to submit to the IRS the coverage, the form that the employers have to send for showing that they've covered their employees' insurance. The actual form is a 1095B. In the past, whenever the individual mandate was still in effect, we completed all of these forms for all of our groups. The employer side that went to the federal government, and then the individual 1095C that went to the actual employees, showing their insurance coverage. Again, like I said, this is all, at no additional cost. It's literally just an Excel file that whoever processes your payroll uploads to us. There are some accounting software packages that will do this. It just imports your payroll file. But like I said, it is a free service that we offer that y'all can opt into. We just need a decision on whether or not you want to.
Bill, the staff recommendation is that we do opt in. When we discuss that, I mean, we are simply dealing with a lack of subject matter knowledge to make that filing. And so the staff recommendation is to opt into that.
And one more thing, for those that aren't familiar with TAC, like this arts program, if y'all get into it and realize that your accounting software will do this for you, you can withdraw at any time throughout the year. As far as the retiree coverage, that can be changed from year to year at renewal. We're not holding your feet to a fire in any type of contract on any of these decisions. They can be changed at least year to year.
So do we have any questions or discussion? Or if
I
not,
would
is there,
move to
Commissioner-
opt in for the ACTS package.
and Commissioner, just so we could deal with everything at once, would you be willing to accept an amendment to your motion to authorize
Yes.
Ray Keith to execute any necessary
Yes.
documents to do
Thank
that?
you. Yes.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Any
And Hurley
discussion?
just did.
Thanks, Dan.
Bill, could I request one additional authorization from the board that they authorize me to execute the appropriate documents for the Cobra election that we made previously?
Let us get the vote on this one. We'll go back and take a vote
Right.
just so
Sorry,
clear
Bill.
order. Any discussion on the arts form for the electronic reporting? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And then going back to Ray, to be sure our delegations are clear, I'd entertain a motion to authorize Ray Keith to execute any necessary forms for the COBRA process as approved, but to execute the orders of the RPDO corporate board as previously passed in this meeting.
That sounds very easy, so I'll make that motion.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Anything else on the health insurance side?
Not really. Most of the rest is just whenever it comes down to your personnel policies, like what your waiting period is going to be on being eligible for the benefits. Most of the times that's the same time as, you know, when they can enroll in the retirement programs. You know, any benefits that you offer, y'all may be discussing that later. And then cafeteria plan administration. I don't need formal votes on those. That's just more informational that will go on the contract paperwork for Ray to sign.
Ray, are you comfortable with the authorizations on any of those? Or are there any additional language that we need to include in the scope of what you're authorized to sign on the paperwork with them?
No, I'll bring it back to the board if it becomes an issue.
Okay, with that, on the health insurance then, are we ready to go back to the EIN?
I think from staff's point of view, we are.
Anything else from the board standpoint? Okay, Matt, sorry I keep coming back to you on it. Have you had a chance to look at the EIN issues and see what might be the best options?
Yeah, they're one, I think your chief public defender as your chief executive officer can be the executor and the responsible party for purposes of filling out the EIN. I think that the appropriate organization that we will file under is a local government. We are performing governmental functions. It's defined as performing governmental functions, and that we're doing it on behalf, governmental functions on behalf of another governmental unit. So I think that's what we'll end up filing underneath. As far as the date goes, I probably need to look a little bit closer at the date that we would actually, as far as wages first paid and hold on a second. The date that business started or acquired, I probably will need a little more time to figure that out exactly, but that's the way that we're headed. And if there is any need for board action tonight, the only thing that I would suggest is normally your chief executive officer, as long as it's within the course and scope of business that y'all have already approved, in other words, ancillary to something that you've already done, has the authority to go ahead and submit those forms on behalf of the corporation. So I would be comfortable doing that, but it sounds like each time y'all are giving your chief executive officer specific authority to execute documents on behalf of the corporation. And so if you're going to take any action tonight, then I would suggest that you authorize if he's comfortable doing it, he may not be, authorizing your chief public defender to execute the form for the EIN, subject to your general counsel and your chief public defender filling out the form, because the only real two things that we have left is the date that it actually starts. Ray, you may want to sit there and do something different, but that's my thoughts at the moment.
And let me bring up one issue that I think maybe some of where Ray's at, because we have the unique situation with we are continuing to operate also as a subdivision of Lubbock County at this point. Ray's official appointment as chief public defender starts January 1st, which is why we've been doing the specific delegations of authority on each item, since until that point he's a legal stranger, just to be sure that we don't put him in a strange position or have a delegation to somebody who's not actually a employee of the corporation at this point.
Wow, Ray, I didn't know that there was such thing as a legal stranger. That's a new term for me.
In so many ways, Matt.
I think
I
Willie
understand.
sang about that.
My request to the board would be that they authorize me to engage in consultation with corporate counsel for making those decisions to fill out the SS4 form as advised by counsel, and then to complete that filing with the IRS with the appropriate signatures that are required.
Andrea, did I? And
Yeah, I guess my question is if Ray's appointment isn't effective, whether we need to come up with somebody else to be that responsible, to be the officer, since he's not an officer of the organization and we can't wait until he is to submit the form. And I say that with hesitation as the treasurer, because I'm probably the next most likely person.
You read my mind, Andrea. I was just about to ask to be recognized to make the motion that you be that person for purposes of the EIN.
I'm happy.
Certainly, we certainly can do that. And if you're volunteering, then I'm sure somebody will be glad to make the motion.
I just made that motion. I didn't hear a second, but I did make the motion.
Second.
it's now been seconded. Jeff, did I hear you start to make a comment a minute ago?
It's we can come back to it a little bit later. It's unrelated. It's all right.
Do we have any further discussion on this item? Or since Andrea made such an excellent suggestion that was motioned and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we've got our EIN. Before we move on to the next item, did you want to go to what you were bringing up, Jeff, or was it something to take up later?
Yeah, if it's okay, I don't know if we can do this, but I would love for Ray to be able to speak with counsel about how do we negotiate this period between now and January 1st? Is there an easier way than making a motion every time to have give Ray agency to do this? I would love, if council thinks of an easier way to do that, I would love for them to discuss that before the next meeting.
We'll be glad to do so. I have some ideas.
Thanks, sir.
Ray, I see the hand.
I just want to clarify who's having that discussion.
I think that you and I are going to have the discussion between now and the next meeting, and then I'll come back with some recommendations for the board at the next meeting.
So it's implicit that I'm authorized to do that?
I think you're already authorized to speak with counsel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, looking at our remaining items on the agenda, I believe they were more for discussion to start thinking about the issues for our next meeting. Is that correct, Ray and Elaine?
So we put, and if you'll give me a second to work out a computer problem here, all of a sudden I can't see my toolbar.
And actually, while you're looking at that, Ray, just looking ahead, and I know we're going to need to look at figuring our next meeting in 2 weeks. Would the same time on Tuesday, the 29th work for everyone?
And I can clarify for the chair what my, I guess my concern for that is once the board has decided on a meeting.
I'm seeing some thumbs up. I'm not seeing any negatives. So we'll plan on Tuesday, the 29th for our next meeting. But Ray, it sounded like you had something on looking toward the next meeting.
So the agenda items that the members have are largely discussion items regarding liability coverage and workers' compensation coverage. The division of TAC that we are discussing that with, or subject to council's advice on procurement rules and those type of things, but we are in terms of the information that TAC needs to go forward on liability coverages and workers' compensation coverages, what I would request from the board is that I have authorization to talk about those issues with council to determine either whether the board will authorize me upon consultation with council to make a determination of those coverage limits, or whether I'm authorized to just simply consult with him and bring back to the board for further discussion about the various coverage limits and the implications that are involved for the different liability coverages that I believe we will need. And I know that is really vague and unclear, but ultimately, I'm hesitant to make any recommendation to the board on liability coverage or workers' compensation coverages without consulting counsel. And I think that if I'm happy to make those selections with the advice of counsel, I'm happy to bring them back to the board for that decision. But that is why they are on the agenda as discussion items.
Any feelings on the board as to which way the board would prefer to go? I know part of it is that Commissioner McKay.
I would be comfortable in authorizing, granting Ray the authority to work with our council to determine the levels of coverage and to begin making those decisions and then bring that in the next board meeting. I don't think there's a timeline. I don't know if there's a timeline on the liability coverage, but I would make the motion to grant Ray the ability to work with our legal counsel to come up with a recommendation.
Our understanding from the representatives at TAC that their timeline would be a drop dead date on those coverages of mid-November. And so out of an abundance of caution, it would seem that the board would need to make a decision no later than November 1. And at that point, to authorize someone to make the appropriate signatures, et cetera.
And I would think y'all could come back at our next meeting in 2 weeks with what your recommendation would be.
Yeah.
I'll second the motion. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
That makes good sense considering the timeline that's in front of us.
I guess I just have a question about that. I'm just worried about sort of stewardship issues. Is that something that we're okay just authorizing be done? Do we require ratification after choices have been made, particularly given the sort of in-between status Ray has at the moment? I don't know. And I'm comfortable either way. I'm new, so I don't really know how all this works. But I am just wondering about the sort of status issues. And I wonder if maybe if we authorize them to do it, but we would require ratification after choices have been made so we don't cause delay, whether or not that makes more sense just from a stewardship standpoint. Just a question.
And I may have misunderstood Commissioner McKay's motion, but I thought it was to go through, make selections, and then bring those as recommendations back to the board.
I thought it was the other way around, so that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't make it that clear, but yes.
Okay.
To bring a recommendation back to the board in 2 weeks.
Okay. I'm good with that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So with that, and I know some of this, Matt, you're coming in without having had a whole lot of time to prepare. But one of the other areas that we've been concerned with is obviously the Texas Purchasing Act and procurement, especially as looking at item that near and dear to your heart, I'm being able to pay you eventually. What do we need to be looking at from the standpoint of banking? And are there any other areas on the standpoint on procurement that you think as a board that a number of us have not dealt with a lot of it directly. We need to be aware of going forward to be as effective as we can be.
Well, both for the banking and the procurement, at one point in time, local government corporations, there was an attorney general's opinion that said you didn't have to follow the bidding statute, the procurement laws. The legislature took care of that and repealed that provision in 2011. So I think that you're going to be following all the bidding and procurement statutes that apply to counties, because it flows up to the originating governmental entity that created the local government corporation. So we're going to be looking at definitely following Chapter 262 for procurement as a general rule, and also Chapter 116 for banking. So I think the next thing that we probably, if you're going to be looking to get a bank account and set up a depository, is it shouldn't take too long. And I certainly have, and I know the county, Lubbock County has, I'm sure could assist us as well, but we can set up an RFP process for banks that we can then put on a future agenda in relatively short order. So y'all can go ahead and start going through the process of selecting your depository. And this general procurement, we're just going to have to be following for anything that's above a certain level. We'll also be looking at purchasing policies that will go into place after January 1, because while there's certain limits where you have to go through bid statutes, usually the questions come in as far as what you want to do where those limits don't apply. If we're below it, what's the policy you're going to follow? Whether or not, some entities go out, and even though you aren't necessarily required to go and get bids, they require that whoever's doing the procuring call 5 different places to sit there and get some type of price set up so that they can come back, so that there's some sort of justification to file for the purchase of the product. So those are the types of things that we'll be looking at in the near future. But I think we're generally going to be following what counties have to follow as far as procurement goes.
Bill, can I ask a question, Mr. Wade? Would it make sense once that account is set up for Lubbock County to deposit, and I don't know what amount this would be in, but some amount of funds into that new account, just so that the new corporation can act really? I mean, just so get kind of its ducks in the road before January 1st.
Yeah, we certainly can source some startup money. We certainly can look at that. There are specific provisions, though, for the transfer of funds by a local government into a local government corporation's account. So I'll have to look at that a little bit more closely. I think it's a good idea, and if it's possible, then we should, because you are going to have some initial costs, more than just me, I'm sure, when it comes up. So we're going to, I'll look at that, but we got to make sure that we follow and make sure that the county's comfortable with that, doing that as well.
Great, thank you.
Ray, I see a hand.
I just want to be clear that the board is comfortable, such as the authority that I've been given, that I can talk to council about the procurement issues beyond banking. One of the particular issues that we need to have in place is going to be a contract with a rental car provider, because those are heavily utilized by our organization. We need to have that in place by January 1. And I just want to make sure that the board is comfortable under the current authorizations that I've been given to have kind of broad discussions with council about the requirements for the complying with the Procurement Act, whether it be on banking or anything else that we may need to at least put in place for January 1 operation.
And so just to be sure we've addressed that, and because I think there's a lot of areas I could even see potentially some of the airline side of it, I'd entertain a motion to authorize Ray Keith to meet with corporate counsel regarding obligations of RPDO Incorporated under the Texas Purchasing Act, and to obtain advice and bring back recommendations to the corporation for our future procurement as necessary for RPDO operations.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I think we've probably reached the end of the agenda. Is there anything else on the discussion items we need to touch base, or any other items that we've left pending we need to address? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? And we're right at 2 hours. I see a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? That was Judge Livingston and Commissioner McKay. We're adjourned. Thank you, folks. Stay safe. We'll see you in a
Good
couple of
work.
weeks.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Welcome
Hey,
on
y'all.
board,
Good work,
Matt.
everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
You bet.